Now we are in the process of moving into the final panel of today. The panel is actually addressing how we are going to navigate into 2021 and beyond. And for this panel, we have got two experts on this, I'd say. We have Andrew Tan of Temasek. He's the Managing Director for Enterprise Development and also the Managing Director for Strategy at Temasek. Previously also the Chief Executive at the MPA. With him, we have Håkon Bruaset Kjøl, who is the Senior Vice President and Head of External Relations at Telenor Group in Asia. They are moderated by Lisa Enckell, who's partner at Antler. So please take it away.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's really an honor to be here today. Thank you for putting up this incredible schedule and activities of the different talks here today. So I'm Lisa Enckell, partner at the global venture capital firm Antler. We are headquartered here in Singapore, but we work and invest in startups from all over the world. Today, we will talk about how to navigate as we go into 2021, how to keep the foot on the gas pedal, and how we can continue innovating in this very special year that 2020 has offered us all. And I'm very excited to have this conversation with two extremely knowledgeable and experienced people, Mr. Andrew Tan and Håkon Bruaset Kjøl. It's so great to have you both here. And I'm really looking forward to this. I always want to have a bit of popcorn on the side, but I'll save that for a bit later. So Paul already introduced both of you. I think you both have an incredible background. And I think what you both have, which is very interesting, is that you have one kind of foot in different parts. So Andrew Tan, apart from being a managing director at Temasek, part of the enterprise group, you are also at the strategy office where you are responsible for introducing scenario planning, something that couldn't be more relevant in 2020. In addition, you're also part of the SMEs Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and you're also on the board for Singapore Business Federation's SMEs Subcommittee on Technology, Innovation, and Productivity. So it's really one foot in the up-and-coming technology and startup sector and one foot in the government sector. And at the same time, I think Håkon, being one of the leaders of Telenor, you've been here in Asia for 20 years, really having the perspective of both everything that's happened here in Asia for the past 2 decades and also in Europe. And interestingly, you're also on the board of Snøhetta. It's an architectural firm based in Norway. And if there are any people I would love to have dinner with right now, it's the architects and what's going on in their mind and in their work. So as you can tell, I'm really excited. So let's kick this off. And I thought we should start a little bit just by reflecting on the previous conversations we have been having today without going too much into details of them. And I know, obviously, it's been a very challenging year for humanity and for the world, but we have also seen some positive side of things. We have seen lots of creative innovation and increased speed of adoption of digital tools. So I wanted to hand it over to you first, Andrew, with your background kind of in the industry and in the maritime industry in particular, just as you are reflecting on this particular year, what are some of the big changes that you are seeing that the industry now is going through?
Thank you, Lisa. I join you in also having the same sentiments in terms of really being excited to be part of this panel discussion and having had the benefit to listen to the earlier sessions, which were very interesting in terms of the thoughts around how COVID, of course, has changed the world as we know it, but at the same time, created this immense opportunities for everyone to look at things fresh. And I would say that for the maritime sector, even before COVID, it's been facing a fair bit of headwinds and challenges ever since the great financial crisis. And that long-awaited recovery did not take place, certainly during the time which I was running the Maritime Port Authority. We're hoping to see some green shoots, but the container sector was already languishing. The oil and gas was also facing some challenges, but less so when the oil prices recovered. But now it's tanked again, and that's created new problems for them. For the bulk sector, I would say that the super commodity cycle that it was riding on had come to an end by the time of the last decade, and we are going to see more challenges coming ahead, especially with COVID, changing commodity markets and changing essentially the way we live, work, and play. So the question is, how are all these factors going to pan together and influence shipping going forward? And I would say that there are essentially very fundamental forces at work. One, of course, is how the industry itself will have to reposition itself for the world ahead, for the next cycle of recovery, and beyond that, right? They'll have to look at things like automation, digitalization. Particularly, COVID has laid bare the fact that many of these processes, many of these operations could and should have been automated, should have been done earlier. And the last thing I would add to that is that sustainability is going to be more and more important, and that's something that we should be thinking about, not only for this industry, but for all the other sectors as well.
And if we move over then to a big multinational organization with offices in so many parts of the world, so you've seen this from so many different angles at Telenor, what are some of the things you see in your particular, in the telecom industry, in the, very at the heart of digital infrastructure? What are some shifts you are seeing, Håkon?
Well, I think, Lisa, first, thanks for your kind introduction, and also thanks to NBAS for inviting me here to have this conversation with you and Andrew and I. I think this year has been, for all of us, of course, a very unprecedented time. And I don't think Telenor has been much different than most other companies. It's been very much about ensuring that we are able to run our networks in a good way. As things went from being analog to being more digital, the dependency that people have on the digital network, and particularly the mobile network, just increased. And we've had put a lot of effort into making sure that we are, able to deliver uninterrupted digital services throughout the 5 markets which we are operating in Asia. And we are very mindful that more than 175 million people in these 5 markets rely on Telenor for their digital needs on an everyday basis. The second part we've had a lot of focus on this year has been to look after our people. We have between 9,000 to 10,000 people working here. In addition, we have a lot of partner people working with us, in particularly maintaining our retail network, which comprises of approximately 700 to 750,000 retail touchpoints. And making sure that these people are safe is, of course, one of the most important tasks for us throughout the year. Then 2 more kind of accelerated events. One of them linked to the digitalization in general. And we've seen that people have, with the mobile phone in their pocket, moved a lot of their lives, everything from the way we play, the way we work, the way we learn, into the mobile device. And through this year and through the acceleration where overnight the analog world pretty much disappeared, we've also worked a lot to reinforce our digital capabilities to serve our customers better. And we have done a little bit what Andrew touched on, is to try and strengthen and reinforce our network operations to be more automated, to be using the big data capabilities that we have built, moving towards a more zero-touch type of model, which in a way, of course, reduces the dependency on human beings and increases the probability of delivering good quality network experience in these markets.
Yeah, I mean, you're really doing such an incredible, it's really the infrastructure now of the world that really makes the world kind of go around and allow us all to continue working and learning and doing those things.
And then it was important before.
Yeah.
We would claim, at least in our industry, knowing how much time people spend on their mobile phone. But when we are looking at the data search that has taken place in the 5 Asian markets in this period, I mean, it's tremendous how this has actually shifted in just a couple of months. And even the more die-hard analog person wanting to go to the shop to buy stuff were in a way forced to pick up new habits. And we try to respond to that in a good and timely manner.
Yeah, I've seen that among my grandparents and my mother-in-law. They're now doing a lot more things online that they, we've been talking about this for 10 years, trying to get them, convert, and now finally they are. So you can definitely see the big shifts. And we're now 8 months into this pandemic, and of course we all have been interrupted, to say the least, from our daily routines. But I think it's also kind of time to really look ahead. And while there are promising developments around vaccines, the timeline, it's still somewhat blurred, and it's hard to actually see what's gonna happen. So Andrew, I'm super curious about how you are working around your role in introducing scenario planning, and if there's any things you can share on those, where we are today and those different scenarios we have ahead of us.
It's very interesting that you asked me this question about scenario planning, because for those of us that's very accustomed to very quantitative econometric models, scenario planning doesn't really sit into any of these buckets, because a lot of it is instinctive, a lot of it is also normative, and it's also about looking at connecting dots across developments that are taking place across the world itself. But I think if we look at where increasingly we are moving into this so-called VUCA, volatile, complex world, I think scenario planning will have an increasing role to play in terms of helping us map out what are possible futures. And here, scenarios are not meant to be predictions of the future, but possible futures. So we've been spending the last few months, certainly in Temasek, trying to make sense of that complex landscape out there. Basically, if the world is more volatile and you have a low returns environment, where do you find the returns? And of course, you have to take into account driving forces like at the geopolitical level, you have this rising tensions between the US and China. What started off as a trade tensions has now morphed into a sort of strategic rivalry that's going to pan out across so many areas of the international arena itself. And then beyond that, you have to look at how the economy is responding to COVID. And COVID, there are so many uncertainties around that, whether it will be a continuous outbreak or would there be smaller localized outbreaks, and that hinges upon how the societal response in terms of containment, social distancing measures, and whether a vaccine, of course, can be found. And then you also have to look at social factors, right? We've seen the Greta Thunbergs of this world and how they've been able to mobilize social change around issues like climate change, but there are also a host of other issues. I think Håkon, we were having a discussion earlier on in relation to the digital divide. That could be another big issue that may arise, arising from the rapid advancement of technology in a world that is increasingly bifurcated, and as income distribution also becomes more uneven. And this could lead to a new social movement. What that could be, how that will transform itself, we don't know, but it would certainly lead to changes in attitudes, consumption patterns, and along with that, then how businesses and business models change with that. So we've been working on a couple of scenarios, some of which touch on these key driving forces, but I think we have to be prepared for a world where we can expect the geopolitical tension to pan out. We can expect a world where regional trends, I think Olivia Thornby mentioned this earlier on, where the uncertainty at the global level may actually cause regional groupings to coalesce and find greater solidarity, so to speak, in terms of being able to bring together, whether it's supply chains, or whether it's on the technological front, the much needed investments, as well as investments in infrastructure. And I think this may spur new economic opportunities when you see greater connectivity arising in different parts and clusters around the world itself. And I think you also need to look at technology in all its aspects, because it is both an enabler, but it's also a disruptive force if it's not well managed. And we can see some of these trends arising in parts of Europe, other parts of the world, concerns over data privacy, data localization, data sovereignty, and how different standards may actually emerge out of this. And this could have profound implications in terms of how many of these technology developments may pan out going into the future itself. And last but not least, I think we should not ignore the fact that the world still confronts the biggest challenge before us, and that is climate change, right? With or without COVID, we still have to deal with it. And the question is whether COVID is going to set back the efforts, or is it going to open up new pathways for possibly a new Green Deal that can be put together, where people put in more efforts, more resources into solutions, technology or otherwise, to deal with climate change. And that could be a new economic driver for growth. So I'll just pause this here.
Yeah, I think that is super interesting. And Håkon, I'm curious, are you also looking at different scenarios as you are now planning for 2021 and beyond, and how to move forward from here?
Well, I think, Lisa, this year, I think we have all mostly focused on making sure that we can deliver what our customer demands of us. And that is our #1 priority, in addition to looking after our people. But I think Andrew brings up a couple of points which I think is very important. And, you know, we've always believed that the mobile phone and the mobile internet was for the many, not for the few. And as a result of that, I think this point around digital inclusion, which was maybe a couple of years ago, maybe not so important, because you kind of looked at funny videos of cats and played small games. And then suddenly you have shifted your entire life, everything from health, financial services, you are getting important, vital information from the government, and the government has changed its citizens, services towards the community. And there is a risk in that you are kind of disfranchising a lot of people which are not yet connected. And we look at our industry association, the GSMA, end of last year, they looked at how many people in rural areas are really using internet on their mobile phone, and it's less than half, which actually means that large populations in large countries in Asia are not being part of the journey. And we need to address that. We need to address it together with government, in partnership with other ecosystem players, and we need to address affordability levels, but you also need to address literacy, or digital literacy. And I think that's even a topic that we should talk more about. We talk a lot about fake news, but we are not talking so much about how we are going to teach children how to distinguish between what is real and what is fake. So we can see profound changes as part of the bigger digital journey, also seeping into the education system a little bit earlier on. And maybe we have a little bit neglected that for a while, but I do think that's something that we collectively need to address.
And how do you think we can address it? Like, what are some areas?
By talking about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's #1.
Yeah.
Being very transparent about it, and then also understanding that, it's not necessarily only an income, a low income, high income aspect. It's a generational aspect. And I think, we've seen that very clearly now in Singapore, with the government's very successful track and trace mechanism didn't reach everyone. So you actually have to come up with a tracking device which is a little bit more analog, which can be used by citizens which are not yet, joined the digital journey. So we need to have options. And I think that in this period of VUCA, which Andrew mentioned, I think flexibility and an area to maneuver, and ability to pivot, learn as we go along, is potentially maybe the most important skill for business going forward. It's very different when, in the old days where all the curves were going in one direction. Today, it's very uncertain in what direction they will actually go.
And Andrew, from kind of your perspective in your role, what are some ways where you both are supporting businesses to then support the rest of society? Or is that a way forward, or would you rather than support society and these people directly?
Yeah. Well, Temasek, for those of you who are not familiar, is a global investment firm that's headquartered in Singapore. We manage about 306 billion assets under our management itself. And there are many Temasek portfolio companies that are very much exposed to the Singapore economy. We have Capital, Sembcorp, that's strong in industrial, marine, offshore, and systems integration, and so on. And we also have DBS. We have SIA, of course, that is also bearing the tremendous consequences and impact of COVID. And they are well-run airline, mind you. But there are certain things that you can't really help in a situation like this. So they're all thinking actively what's going to happen in the post-COVID world. I mean, air travel is not going to return anytime soon. Business travel may change fundamentally as offices downsize, as the need for business meetings move on from physical to online presence, and social platforms will of course catch up in terms of their ability to allow for the interactivity that we now find only in physical meetings itself. But certainly for Temasek, we have one advantage, and that is the fact that we are long-term investors. So we invest for the long term, and that gives us the benefit of thinking not just a year ahead or 5 years ahead, but to think really decades ahead. And that's where we can actually deploy capital at different levels, one of which is at the portfolio level, where we are, of course, setting aside capital to look at strategic areas that we can invest in, things that are game-changing when the world transforms into that world that we envisage, where some of the things that I talked about earlier on might become more important. For example, sustainability, climate change, certainly future-proofing our portfolio would be a very key objective that we want to do. We've already announced our commitment to come out in terms of being carbon neutral and also having our emissions by 2030 at the portfolio level as well. So this will of course transform a lot of the things that we do, including the things that we invest in, because in the investment world we don't want to end up with so-called stranded assets that are related to fossil fuel, coal, and some of these other pollutive sort of activities. I'm not saying that they're not important, but I think we can think of better ways of powering cities, better ways of powering our cars, and better ways of keeping our houses cool or warm, depending on which part of the world you're in. But the key thing is this: I think we need to think ahead, and here is where being able to deploy capital to look into emerging high technology areas that may not have reached commercialization. But I think if enough big investors are looking at this space, you can actually bring that cost down. Say in the case of renewables, where at one stage I think people were poo-pooing solar as a renewable source of energy, but look at today. I read that even in India, solar PV has reached grid parity or even lower than coal-powered plants generated electricity. So technological developments will help us adapt to a changing world, and we want to be ahead in the game in this and work with like-minded partners to start investing in this space. Secondly, we also want to build new capabilities, and here is where we want to be a more active investor, working with our portfolio companies to see how we can transform the activities that they are in, right? And the third area would be, of course, as I mentioned earlier on, beyond sustainability, also doing our part for our community. So if you look at what Temasek has been doing for the last few months, we've been very much involved in the COVID-related efforts in terms of helping out with procuring hand sanitizers, masks. These were all items in short supply, but we're able to obtain them from our different partners and suppliers around the world through our wide network of contacts, and at the same time also producing, which I can attest to because I was involved in that effort, locally produced swabs, nasopharyngeal swabs, the one that goes deep into your nasal cavity itself. And imagine at one stage we had to import many of these things from other parts of the world, but now we have actually local capability to produce them. So I think similar efforts are underway in other parts of the world because COVID has prompted people to think about essential supplies, to think about resilience, and how you need to bring about some domestic capability to do that. So I think resilience will also be a key theme for us going forward as we look at areas to invest in, and supply chains, logistics, transport. These are all key to the flow of global goods and so on. So I would say that these are some of the emerging areas that we should be thinking deeply about.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. Living through this pandemic, through this year here in Singapore, as someone from Sweden, and seeing kind of both countries' reactions and activities around this has been super interesting, and I've learned so many things I didn't know anything about, such as supply chains for countries and the way Singapore has been acting on some of those things. It's been yeah, it's been just interesting to just live. Yeah, Håkon.
I just want to pick up on a point that Andrew also mentioned earlier around. So some of the larger enterprises have always kind of been at the forefront of the digital journey. But I do believe that we also have an opportunity now to make sure that the large, small enterprises, which is actually the biggest portion of many national economies. If you look at Southeast Asia alone, Thailand, Malaysia, 40% almost of all businesses in these countries are SMEs.
Mm.
And one of the things that I heard, Oliver Tonby also mentioned this morning is that what we see now is that those that were already on the digital path have fared much better than those that was forced to kickstart their digital journey overnight. And I think we see that in our local restaurants also here in Singapore. I mean, my local neighborhood restaurant was not prepared, but a lot of others prepared, and of course they got up to speed. And many have actually learned a lot in the customer interfacing part, ordering, serving, distributing, etc. But there are a big chunk of this where digitalization have not yet happened, whether it's in purchasing, procurement, whether it's in the way you manage your HR system, your manpower, all those small things which really need to change for them to remain competitive in the new world. Yeah. And I think we all have, and we are trying in the Telenor Group in some of our markets to actually address these segments now, particularly both by increasing the awareness together with SME associations, together with the national regulators and the promoters of technology, but also directly going in there and providing solutions, simple things which manages a workflow, for example, related to how you run a workforce in a small F&B. It means a lot, and you get them kind of on the journey, and it's an opportunity, and it's a responsibility I think that we actually have.
And I think on that note, Håkon, you have also looked into, similarly, for 2021, looking into some of the bigger tech trends of what's coming. Are there any of those bigger trends you can share with us?
It's a little bit too early. Telenor Research announces its tech trend report at the end of the year, but I think, so look out for that, everybody, on the telenor.com webpage.
You have to send me a copy.
I will send you a copy for sure. But I think two things which are standing out, maybe, which are important. The first one is around the way we need to think about infrastructure in our cities. There is no doubt that over the years we have seen people starting to work from home, and it happened actually before the lockdowns occurred. And people are working from home, and they prefer to work nearer to home. And as such, there might be a change in the way we think about the way we plan our cities. City centers like downtowns, business district might end up being very different if we continue working from home much longer. And I do believe, and in Telenor we believe, that these habits sort of have changed already, which means that authorities' investments need to potentially be shifted from pure transport road infrastructure to potentially digital road infrastructure. And if you think about it, the employees benefit from less commute time, which you can either use to deliver more in your job or get more time with your family and friends. You spend less time in traffic, which means that you hopefully pollute less, which means that you could have a better climate and environment long term, and eventually even longer term be more healthy. So the ripple down effects of some of these changes might be actually quite big. The second change is something that Andrew touched on already, which is more related to the use of data. There are 2 point something billion mobile internet users in Asia today. Within the next 5 years or 4.5 years, we will see that number grow with another 700 million people. All those devices give away data, and that data can be used for social good if we do it the right way. There is a lot of discussion everywhere around data privacy, and it's an important debate. But we do believe, and we've done work with Harvard University on using anonymous data to actually predict, pandemics. And we started that work in Bangladesh and Pakistan to focusing on malaria and dengue fever. But we have now, in the recent pandemic, worked with the health authorities both in Norway and in Denmark to actually furnish them with data sets which are better as part of a plug and play into the epidemiological models that allows them to implement measures better. So I think the use of big data, as long as we keep on giving data, is an area which is a prediction that we think will be quite important.
And I think we saw it here in Singapore. I think the Trace Together app and all those other tracing has been such an important work in kind of, you know, working to eliminate the cases in Singapore. And I think how was the react? Do you know, like if I may, like how were the reactions on that kind of app? Because that is really core to the data privacy and this debate, which is so interesting. I think
here is where, you know, if you have applications that may use a lot of data, and even if you anonymize it, how you roll out is very important. So providing that assurance, safeguards to the public, and if you can think ahead and anticipate that this will be the sort of issues that people will be concerned about, then I think it's important for any organizations, whether it's telcos or banks or healthcare providers, you know, to provide that level of trust and assurance that can position you in society as a reputable player and responsible enough to handle that data. I think in many parts of the world, you know, this trust is lacking. And that explains why adoption rates in many parts of this world, whether it's the use of contact tracing apps, or for that matter, even whether vaccines themselves are safe to be used, I think they run against this great deficit of trust. So I will put more emphasis on building systems that are trustworthy and stay ahead of that curve. And I think the many areas that Håkon, you mentioned in terms of finding ways to make use of data, and not necessarily in big strategic ways, but even in small ways as helping SMEs do their work better. I think these are necessary steps in order to build that whole architecture up from ground up. I think in the past, what we've been trying to do is do it from top down. And that's where it doesn't really percolate down. But now with COVID, everyone finds a very existentialist threat before them. And if they don't have an online presence or move something to online delivery in the case of mom and pop shops for hawker centers and smaller food establishments, then you're in deep trouble, right?
You have a business.
And you have a business. And I think here is where players like Telenor and others who can then leverage on this, you're actually creating new business opportunities for yourself. And maybe one day, Telenor may not be in telco per se, but you could be in some other part of this digital world that's yet to be defined. And I think this is a good time, therefore, for everyone to rethink their business models, because it will be changed in the coming months and years ahead.
At least we are reassured one thing: connectivity is going to be important.
That's right.
Because without connectivity, there will be no digital services on top of it.
That's right.
No, but on that note, on the digital services on top of it, or on keep innovating, because I know a lot of businesses has been in a kind of a damage control mode over the past months, but we need to also look ahead, and we need to keep innovating and keep being creative. And are the any of you, have you experienced some great ways of how do you collaborate, and how are you creative in a group but online? When you no longer can problem solve in front of your whiteboard, how can you sit in front of your screens and actually not only damage control and do whatever is necessary, but go beyond that and innovate and be creative and create new things?
Well, if I knew, I would most probably write a book about it.
Oh, nice.
Because I believe that there's a lot of businesses around there.
I think so.
Pondering on the same problem. Because one of the things that we are experiencing is that, running existing operations and plans that we implemented pre-COVID, and of course also partly into COVID, is easy to execute on in this mode. And I think one of the areas where we now have to put a lot of attention is to how do we actually move into the more development and the innovation stage of that. And it's possible, but it's harder. And we do also see that we need to find spaces where we can actually do that together, which is not only digital. And hence, Telenor announced in June that we would in a way move to a more hybrid model where our employees can choose to either work from the office or at home in what we call flexible working, to kind of try and stimulate a new type of working model where maybe the time in the office is spent more for thinking new ideas and thoughts, and being at home is more about contemplating and getting things done.
Yeah. So likewise, in Temasek itself, we have what we call pods. There are actually groups of people we put together, and if there's expertise missing, we will bring them in, and then they work on projects, and these projects may then spin off into bigger projects. AI, blockchain, these are some areas that we're exploring with, and then we work with our portfolio companies, and then if there's a solution that can be ramped up, then creates opportunity for new business itself. So this is examples where we try to bring about some internal disruption, while at the same time, when you encounter a situation like COVID, where you are out there trying to think of new novel solutions, that also creates an opportunities for you to bring different groups of people together and to come out with a better mousetrap, so to speak. And I think this is where, you know, in a period like this, experimentation, innovation can actually go very far, because you can actually work under very severe time existentialist constraints. So shouldn't lose that opportunity to do so. Yeah.
And I also think it's a great opportunity to push yourself to be closer to the customers, because never has, in a way, customer-centric innovation been at the heart that we have seen now. Because in the past, you could look at model market research and you could say, well, this is last month, it's still relevant. But today you see consumer behavior changing pretty much overnight. Some of it, of course, done through regulation because we were locked in, but also since then we have actually seen consumer picking up new ideas. And necessity is the mother of pretty much all innovation, right? As a saying, and hence I do believe that we need to pay a lot of attention to what our customers are thinking, and we also need to think about how do we innovate together with our customers more than trying to sit in our own little house and do innovation.
And so on that note, just it's already almost time's up, so we need to conclude now. But I'm curious, kind of, despite, as I said before, it's been a really rough year and a sad year and so forth, it has kind of shown seeds of opportunities. And I'm curious, like, are there any, you said more customer-centric organizations, that sounds amazing to me, I would love that. Are there any other kind of opportunities like this that kind of has emerged throughout the past months?
We have to think.
I know, it's okay, you can think. You can think.
Maybe I can just add that, you know, with COVID, we see the world moving towards lesser friction, because digitalization has been given that booster shot in the arm, right? So question is, how do you sustain these behavioral changes going forward that will continue to push this digitalization drive? And here is where, you know, whether you're a government agency, whether you're a business entity, or whether you're an investment firm, I think here is where there's a lot of opportunity for players to come together and to think of sectors of the economy that either need help, which is then open for new opportunities, or new emerging sectors of the economy where there's unmet demands there, which COVID has laid bare, and then to capitalize on this. As Håkon has highlighted, you know, we really don't know what the world will be like arising out of a confluence of so many profound changes happening in such an unprecedented period of time. So the only way forward, as I see, is for everyone to come together, reduce your risk, right, and put your minds, and then to identify opportunities and move ahead, and to make sure that you have people there that are open-minded as well, and also have the set of skills. We didn't have a chance to talk about skills, but I think skills for this new digital world, or whatsoever you call it, will be absolutely key. And if we don't make that transformation, then I think issues like the digital divide that we talked about earlier on, issues like the social divides that may come about, I think this will be a great setback to the global economy going forward. So I think we have a lot of good things running for us, but there are also tailwinds if we are not conscious of the fact that we need to bring the rest of society and the community together, because social compacts themselves will also be reviewed going forward out of this COVID crisis.
No, I think those are really good points. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts.
No, not other than that. I mean, a lot of businesses have spent a lot of time in the last couple of years trying to solve customer pain points, and I heard that mentioned in the session before us. And I think we are looking at what I would call not a pain point, but a pain knot, which is most probably so big that if you think that you can try and solve it alone, you're most probably going to fail. And I think that call for collaborative action, as Andrew is talking about, in a public-private partnership is most probably a word used too often without a lot of meaning, and can become a little bit hollow. But I do think that this is an opportune time to actually get all the forces together to solve problems.
And I think we've seen that a lot in research with this. I think it's very very promising in the science world, and we also see it a lot now in the government and the business world. With that, I would love to say thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you so much, Håkon. It was very generous of you to give us your time, but also to give us an insight on what's going on in your various organizations and what you see from your different seats in the world. Super inspiring. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening. And just a final word to our sponsor, Telenor. Thank you so much for sponsoring. And now, please, over to Paul again.